Hi, welcome to the Indie Wine Podcast, episode 54. My name is Matt Wood, and today we're hearing from Josh Hammerling of Hammerling Wines in Berkeley. Josh and his team are making great traditional method sparkling wines in a variety of styles. We talk about how Hammerling got started, some of the techniques they use when crafting their wines, and a lot of the unique aspects of running a small sparkling wine production. Just a quick reminder, there's a link to a Patreon in the show notes if you'd like to support the podcast with a donation to help me keep telling wine stories ad-free. Or you can also help by just telling a friend that you enjoy it. Here we go.
This is what you do, to be totally honest, so it's pretty hard to lock it in and be fully confident that you'll be able to run with that name for your whole career. But that's okay, though. In our case, it was a blessing in disguise.
Nice. What was your interest in wine? How'd you kind of come across it?
Yeah, I mean, so for me, it kind of started at the end of college. My parents liked wine when we were growing up, but it wasn't really a staple. Like every day there was wine at the table, and going to the cellar. It would be like on a special occasion, someone would break out a bottle of Jordan Cab or something, and we'd get to sip it. But really, it started when I turned 21. We started going to the Willamette Valley every once in a while in college because I was just old enough to actually legally drink. So I went to school in Tacoma, Washington, and so we were close enough. And so we would go down there, check it out, and go just drink a bunch of Pinot and be like, this is really cool. And I was just kind of taken by the agricultural aspect. The whole process just seemed really opaque to me. I didn't really understand, and so I was just very intrigued by it. And of course, it was wine, so it was fun to drink. And then from there, it branched out to sort of checking out the Walla Walla area, and was really intrigued by GSM blends and stuff like that. And so that's kind of where it started.
Okay. Yeah. And then that's kind of where you ended up starting your career at.
Yeah.
Also, right?
Yeah. So I'd been working with my brother in the film industry. At the time, I had graduated from college, and we were working on a film called My Country No More that was about the oil boom in Western North Dakota.
Oh, okay.
So we were traveling out there a lot, and I thought that was my career path, that I was going to do something related to film and media. And it was really fun, crazy project, but it lasted 6 years, and it did well. We did like the little festival run with it and everything. But in that process, I also realized I wanted to try something different. And so I started doing the tasting room thing, got a job just kind of pushing a broom, and then started managing a couple of tasting rooms in the Gorge. And where it really kind of turned a corner was when I was thinking about going back to take a job at an ad agency after that little period of exploration. Yeah. And then I went on a float trip with my cousins and realized I had this opportunity to work a harvest, and I couldn't tell if that was a step in the wrong direction. And that was at Syncline with James Mantone. Okay. And that experience just kind of blew me away. And I was living at their house and on the farm, just waking up just to the most beautiful views. And it just blew my mind. And so I didn't really ever look back after that. Okay. I was like, this is amazing. I need to figure out how to do this. And was just lucky enough that they needed help after harvest, working in the vineyard. So I helped them plant, I think it was 7 acres. Okay. The Scamé Mondouse site. It was really super inspiring and just really fun. I think I was craving something more tactile because I'd been on more of this academic path, studying philosophy and media. And so just being able to actually get your hands dirty and watch bubbling tanks of grapes foam over and having to dig out stuff with stainless steel buckets, all that was just so cool. And being out in the middle of nowhere, it was just so peaceful. The Gorge is one of the prettiest places in the world. So that was really where it kind of bit me. Okay. And I think I also at the same time, I felt like I was behind somehow, which was insane in retrospect because I was in my early 20s. It was over a decade ago. And I was like, oh, I've had this other career path, but now I need to catch up. So I kind of entered this monkish phase of just insane study where I was in 3 tasting groups that met weekly. It was just living and breathing it, and just, working in the tasting room and hanging out with friends and cellars in our spare time, making wine in our basement. Just all of it sucked. But we learned a lot. Sure. And hung out a lot in the cellar at Analemma and at Syncline, and they were both making sparkling. And so that was really I was just so fascinated. I was like, how do you do this? This process seems crazy. You're making the wine twice. So there's a million opportunities to mess it up. But somehow they both were able to achieve these really beautiful expressions, often kind of rooted in one site. Like in the case of Analemma, the Atavis vineyard, those wines were so cool. And Syncline, a few different sites on Underwood. And so just, that was really where I started to figure out like what different vineyards, would actually taste like in an individual sort of single varietal, single vintage expression in sparkling. And so I was like, this is so cool. Like I want to learn more. And it didn't seem like anyone was talking about it. Like sparkling wasn't that cool. There were some pet nets that were popping up here and there, but they were all just really cloudy and not as precise. And I was more interested in what people were able to achieve with the traditional method, which wasn't necessarily cool at the time. Everyone wanted to be doing more natty things, but that's why we started focusing on that, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was kind of the impetus, is just to like look at those sites through kind of the lens of sparkling.
Yeah. And to kind of take a more minimal intervention approach, I think the one thing I was just curious why I didn't see more in the marketplace was people who were taking a lower intervention approach for the primary fermentation, using native yeast, lower sulfur, having wines that were very much alive, but then controlling the second fermentation a little bit more.
Okay.
So that way you can build a lot of complexity, because if you're fermenting and aging a thing in neutral barrels for like 6 or 12 months, and the wine itself, you taste it kind of like blooms in front of you, like that beautiful thing that happens with the best natural wines. Wanted to figure out how to achieve that with traditional method sparkling. And so the plan was always to stay in the gorge, but then I met my now wife, who's a researcher at UC Berkeley. And so I was at a transitional moment in my career where I was like, I need to take the next step. I want the next challenge. Had really gotten a foundation by working with James Mantone, especially at Syncline. Just learned so much about like a sort of the semi-carbonic approach to like Rhone winemaking, like how to achieve a style that was like really fresh and bright, like wines that kind of slice, not bludgeon. That was always the goal, was like how to figure out how to do that. And he kind of gave me the tools from a red winemaking perspective, in addition to the sparkling. And so then, but beyond that, there really wasn't a handbook. Like there was no textbook for like, this is how you make traditional method sparkling. And so we continued to learn, and my relationship got more serious with Jessie, my wife now. And we were looking at it, and I was like, well, I really want to start my own brand, and you have a much more stable job than I do. So I was like, I should probably move to you. But I didn't want to put all my eggs in one basket. So I started applying for jobs all over the world.
Okay.
So that was in 2017. I applied to a few places in Austria, Pierre Peters in Champagne. I lied and said I spoke French, which I did not speak a word of it. And I was planning on figuring it out if I got the job. That's how stupid I was at that time. But they said no.
Duolingo.
Yeah, exactly. Just like Duolingo. I'm in the cellar, just like translating, like, you want me to rack it where? But so luckily I did get a couple of other gigs, but the people who reached out to me first accepting the harvest position was actually Brock and Cerritos. And so I was like, oh, I really want to work with both of them. And so I came down and was just like, visited. And I was like, I think this makes sense. I wanted to learn from Chris and see how they were achieving these like really fresh, kind of like beautiful styles of like understated Zinfandel and Chenin, all these really fun varieties that I liked. So I moved down and worked for him. And it was like a really fun, really challenging harvest. 2017 was crazy with the heat wave and fires. Yeah. But we had a really good time. Just, it was cool to get to kind of break into the California scene that way, and then started working for Donkey and Goat. And then at that point I was starting to get more serious. I was like, I think it's time for us to like launch our thing. And so we were starting to research vineyards around California that would be well suited to cooler climate, lower intervention, Pinot, Chard, and more experimental stuff like Valdegay and even Carignan. We've experimented a lot, but so that was after that period. That was when we kind of like just really dove in. And it just feels like we've been kind of in a sprint ever since. But it was cool. I mean, we decided to call it Blue Ox because of the connection to the Midwest. But really we were just trying to refine that approach to cooler climate sites, individual varieties, individual vintages. I think when I started, that was the hope, was to have everything be single vineyard, single vintage. Okay. For sparkling. It turns out that's nearly impossible to do that every year consistently and retain access to every vineyard. Right. But because there's heat waves, there's so many things. Sparkling is just particularly humbling because just still winemaking in general is already so hard. But with sparkling, especially in a Mediterranean climate like California, you have a really narrow window for picking. Can be as narrow as like a day, especially in heat wave years.
Okay.
And often you're sort of balancing out this. You're like, all right, if we're going to pick now, it'll be a little bit green and underripe, but we'll have the acid we need. It's going to be a little bit more malic leaning, like so it might be a little harder or maybe take longer to come around. But you're basically debating whether you do that or potentially miss the window. And sometimes in 1 or 2 days, it goes from like 18 bricks to like 22 bricks, and it still might taste underripe.
Yeah.
And so then you have this. So it's really weird. It's every year there's a new challenge in that way. But what we've done is like work with as many sites from as many AVAs as we can drive to without losing our minds. So we have a really broad palette to work with in the cellar for blending.
Okay. Kind of give you the pieces you need to always make something work then.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and we're, because we don't own anything. We don't own vineyards. We just have a lot of long-term agreements with growers we've been working with since day one, who are just farming in the way that we would want to be farming if we were in charge. And so it really just gives us, like I said, broad palette. And so we are a micro negociant producer. We want to make wines that are really intriguing. So we have a lot of blends like Sunflower Sutra and Sunset Debris are kind of our core, like brut rosé. They're sort of the whole orchestra. But then we also do single vineyard bottlings that are sort of like the soloist, where it's meant to just be like something unique and singular. At least that's the hope. It doesn't always work, but we do our best. So yeah.
What were some of your influences when starting out? I guess specifically maybe with sparkling wine.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting thing, but beyond the people who are making the sparkling in the gorge, I mean, a lot of the people that we were coming into contact with had a slightly more conventional approach than we maybe were interested in, but the wines were still really delicious. But then I think one of the moments that was kind of an aha moment with it was we don't actually drink much champagne because it's very expensive. And so it's not like I can actually speak to the full spectrum of what is being produced there. But we had a bottle, I forget which bottling it was, but from Margay that was, I think it was called like the Shaman or something. And it was this rosé that was like mostly Chardonnay with a little bit of Pinot. And it just like, it did exactly what I was talking about earlier, where you're like, it's like savory, but somehow still fresh and like mineral driven. And like the wine was just like evolving before your eyes. And then there was another producer, I'm going to butcher the name, but David Leclapar, like that does like almost like sherry style champagne, where it's like oxidative.
Okay.
And again, the wine just is like blooming and changing by the minute when you taste it. The wines like that just blew my mind, where I was like, I don't understand how you can achieve this. And I think it's just different in champagne. So like I was seeing some of those things as inspirations, but wasn't really seeing an example in California that was doing like a version of that, I guess. And now I think since then, because granted, this was like, 7 years ago or whatever, 8 years ago. So like there are certain producers. I know Cruz is lower intervention in that way with some of the wines, and some of those other people who are kind of doing it. And so we just wanted to do our version, but those ones from abroad were certainly inspirations. But I think that translating that to something in California is hard, because like you want to achieve the freshness and this kind of like chiseled style of wine, but it's really easy for it to stray into tropical round kind of flavors that we're generally trying to avoid. We don't want to go too far, and yet we want to embrace a style of wine that feels uniquely Californian.
Yeah.
So we wanted to move away from extended lees aging. Like we didn't want it to be overly autolytic and sweet, because there's already a sort of perceived sweetness that's already kind of there with the riper style of California fruit. It shines through even in lower bricks often. You know what I mean? It's really powerful.
Yeah.
So we wanted to figure out how to balance that with enough acidity to keep it feeling fresh, and really like build texture on a shorter timeline by using things like barrels, by experimenting with new oak. And part of that was because we couldn't afford to do the extended tirage aging. So we were just trying to figure out techniques to sort of mimic those kind of bright, fresh, alive styles of sparkling that we had tasted.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of your wines do have like they have a certain texture to them that some others don't, but yeah, with that acid cut still.
Yeah, totally. And some of that comes from blending. In a perfect vintage, you get it where it's all one total package from one site. One of the sites that we've just continued to be blown away by is like the Escol Vineyard, which is farmed by Scott Caraccioli, that family down in a Salinas Valley agricultural family. just like wonderful people. Been working with them since day one, and their Pinot is like a good example of that, where like it's just this like powerful, dense core of like red apple skin, kind of like classic. Like it tastes like Pinot, like a Blanc de Noir, but just like ripping acidity and all that flavor at like 10% potential alcohol and all of that round kind of character. And like that is, when you get that, it's like extremely unique. And so we've just done our best to continue seeking out sites like that. We're now, we work with the Alfaros, who are farming Trout Gulch now too for Chardonnay, which is amazing. That's another site. It's one of the vineyards that like made me realize how cool the wines could be in California.
It's a great vineyard. Yeah.
Love that vineyard. And tasting the wines from Seritas and Arnold Roberts kind of were the first ones that made me like do a double take to California, because I had been so Northwest focused. And I feel like all of them have those qualities.
What is it that you're looking for in a vineyard? Because you guys, you work with a pretty wide range of sites. I mean, you have a lot of coastal sites, and then you're working maybe, I think over the years, at least, you've gotten some fruit from even like El Dorado and kind of high elevation vineyards there.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of factors. There's no single thing. I mean, I think that the biggest surprise has certainly been exploring around down south through our connection with Scott Caraccioli. Outside of Soledad, we were kind of put in touch with, say, the Rodnicks, who are farming up basically in Pinnacles Park in the Chalon AVA, like seeing these sites that had a lot of limestone and decomposed granite, certainly for the Escole vineyard. It's like things like Gamay and Syrah, like love that. So the Gamay from that site is just absolutely fantastic. So those are certainly sort of geological features that you're looking for. And then sites that just, have some feature, whether it's the wind, whether it's proximity to the ocean or fog or all of those things that kind of help slow the ripening down, where you can actually build physiological ripeness, hold acidity, and kind of achieve good flavor, but keep the acid. Those are the things that we want. A lot of it, I'm not a scientist, so a lot of it really just comes from tasting wines that seem to have that balance and just kind of trying to reverse engineer what they did and figure out the degree to which they manipulated the wine to achieve that style. If it was like something where it's like, how does this have such crazy acid, but like feels so ripe? And then if you're like, well, the person was just acidifying like in a crazy way or whatever it is, you like have to try to see through those things. But really it just comes from tasting other people's wines that are super inspiring. And then on top of that, seeking out, once you get going, it starts to kind of happen organically, because then people sometimes have tasted our wines and reach out to us because they're like, hey, I think this would work really well, your style of winemaking with our site. And that was really what happened during the pandemic, to be honest, because almost half of our production was being made as a form of trade. We started making wines for other people.
Oh, okay.
We didn't have the resources to just be like buying everything because it's so expensive. So we started making more wines for people. And that happened through just kind of word of mouth, through friends of friends. We had been working with Ian Brand, and so he put us in touch with another vineyard. They wanted someone to be making wine for them. And so that some of it's just that, and we go out and then check out the site after and be like, this actually might work. And then you just try it, Often we just want to take a couple tons and be like, let's treat it like a serious Blanc de Noir and see how it shapes up. That's what happened with Fox Creek, which is in Carmel. And we've loved the quality of that vineyard. The Pinot is amazing. It's not particularly old, but it's just coastal range. It's just up in the mountains in Carmel, and beautiful fruit. So sometimes you just have to try it out,
Yeah. So you're kind of trying and analyzing, probably usually still wines from those vineyards, I would guess, right?
Yeah. Sometimes you put them in barrel and just see how they age. Like there'll be certain sites where you're like, on a chemical level, it feels like they're maybe not quite balanced, or the pHs are like a little bit higher than we would like, because there's an ideal chemistry that you'd be bringing in a lot of the fruit at, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the wine's going to actually be balanced. So sometimes you do that. Certain sites, maybe you're like, you try it out, you're like, should we let this go full mallow? Like, should we block mallow? Do we want to preserve as much of that edge as possible? And sometimes there's basic production things we can do. Like we usually stainless steel ferment for that reason, trying to hone the wine as much as possible. We want there to keep the edge. But there's so many winemaking decisions that can affect the trajectory of the wine that you kind of need to bring it in, like do the normal like routine with how we process it. And then from there, if we felt inspired by it, or like, 6 to 12 months in, we're like, this is actually really good and it's still holding, it has that verve, then we'll maybe go deeper with the site and try fermenting it a few different ways and then just see how it ages.
Okay.
Yeah.
It seems like you use a pretty wide range of kind of techniques for your your sparkling wines? Like you have some that are sort of multi-vintage blend. Like I guess you have the Down by Law Riesling, which is kind of a multi-vintage blend. What's your thinking behind that one? And I guess with Riesling in particular.
Yeah, that one's the crazy one because, I wish that we had been able to continue making it. We took a gap year. There was a couple different reasons. Of course, in 2020 there was like some fires but we did take a little bit of a break from it. So the Solera was transitioned for 1 year to Chardonnay and is going to be back with Riesling, but we actually just checked in on that most recent bottling. The short answer with Riesling is that obviously when you pick it in a way that's lean, you can lock in this like really zesty kind of lemon driven profile. In California, it's hard because if you even stray into the riper side of that grape, it gets stone fruity really quick and it just kind of turns into like, oops, just all peaches. And you're like, oh, I didn't want it to only taste like that. I wanted it to be zippier. And so that was why we wanted to work with it. I mean, the Zabala site is so cool. And you can really like achieve a kind of really fun mineral driven style of Riesling, certified organic. And one of the reasons we initially moved it into a Solera was I wanted to figure out how to soften the edges because that one was so acidic.
Okay.
In 2018, the first time we did it, because we really wanted it to be, it was like 10% alcohol again. And really that wine that we made is just now barely starting to enter its drinking window. It feels like we released it and sold out of it long ago, but it's been interesting checking in where we're like, oh, it's actually kind of coming around now. But the Solera part was really just to build as much texture and mid-palate kind of breadth for the wine that was otherwise a laser beam. So like with a lot of the wines, we think of it as when in its youth, it'll be like a V on your palate where it's just this really linear kind of thing. And the goal is to like somehow push it in a direction where it becomes more of like an H, where there's something that's kind of bridging over it and the edges kind of like flesh out. And so that's however you can get there. You can get there with sugar. You can get there with certain types of barrel tannin. And some of it's just like an oxidative style of winemaking, kind of round it out like that. And that's ultimately what it was with the Solera, was a little bit embracing a little bit more barrel and oxidative aging.
Okay.
And we did that with not only Zabala, but also the Escol Vineyard. So I think you tried that the other day. It's called Firefly Map. We haven't actually released it yet. It's coming out in November, but we've bottled 3 versions of it already and we haven't released one yet, which is insane. It's the joys of sparkling wine production, but it's one of my favorite wines we've made. And it just builds complexity, I think, is the simple answer.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you just got to figure out, I think it's Solos who does the like 20 or 25% of the reserve wine Solera for that substance wine that they do. And so I think on some level, I just either absorbed that number from like one of Peter Liam's books or something like that of like what percentage to try. And we kind of started there. So now with the Solera each year, 75% of the wine is the newer vintage. 25% of it is that perpetual blend from every year.
Okay.
And it also was nice because it takes some of the decision making out of our hands a little bit. Like we still do the blending trials, but we're like, we know roughly where it's going already. That's kind of nice.
Yeah, you've got at least a range to start in, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And then we can kind of tweak it if it feels like it's not right where we want it to be.
Besides the Riesling, you have some other wines that you've made that are made from maybe not traditional sparkling grapes, Syrah or Chenin. Is it just trying to kind of explore and try new things and experiment, see where you can take it in California?
I think so. Yeah. I think at the end of the day, it's just that I whenever I always need there to be the next thing and I'm just endlessly curious of like, would that work? Should we try it? And I think that for the varieties that aren't Pinot, like the kind of noble, like Pinot Chard varieties, I was just taught early on that you just can't use the other varieties. Like a lot of the mentors and stuff were like, don't even try kind of a thing. They're like, they won't have the right chemistry. And I think there's some truth to that. Like a lot of them maybe aren't meant to make the most serious, like age for decades sparkling, but they're also really intriguing. And so using something like Gamay from the Witters Vineyard in El Dorado, the Mansfields farming that one, I had always been intrigued by that wine because of just like, trying like the Bone Jolly wine from there. And then a few other producers who were working with it. It's like, you just can't help but be like, well, let's just try it. Let's just treat it like a serious Blanc de Noir of Gamay and see how that turns out. And we've just been pleasantly surprised by a lot of them. I mean, part of it is that in that early sort of monkish phase, of like being completely isolated and just being in tasting groups and reading all these textbooks and books from various Davis professors and stuff, I kind of created like a notebook of just wines that I wanted to try to make.
Okay.
So in a way, some of it was like premeditated of like, well, why aren't there more like cool sparkling Syrahs domestically? And of course, with most of these wines, it's because the style has kind of been killed by some mass-produced plonk that was being imported for whatever era of winemaking. You know what I mean? Or there's just an association with something that's like cheap or maybe it's not as good. And so it really depends on access. So for the Syrah, it was when we started working with the Alfaros. They had Syrah, and I was like, it just happened to be that the chemistry lined up for Viognier that we had from Rodnik in Chalon and Syrah from the Santa Cruz Mountains that the Alfaros were farming. And I was like, oh, we got to try it. I was like, we can't not try it because it just happened to be that they were both ready. So we brought them both in, and it was wild. Like it's a very unique expression, but it's a really fun, fresh wine. And similarly we got access to Fresa from the Soleto vineyard in that, in the San Benito area. And we were like, well, like, I really want to try a sparkling Fresa because like Italian sparkling wines are just so unique from like non-traditional varieties. And so it's been kind of wild to see it, like do a rosé of Fresa. It's just so singular. It doesn't taste like anything else we've made. And it tastes very Italian, for lack of a better word, in a good way. It's really fun. And then things like Chenin, I had visited, we led a little group of people teaching them about wine through France a while back, and I was fortunate enough to go visit Domaine Huet, and they do a lot of sparkling Vouvray, and I always had loved their wines, and I was like, this is crazy, because it's just like, the profile is like tastes nothing like champagne. Some of them were really rich and ripe and had this like honeycomb, like honeyed waxy thing, but that was really pleasant and fun still. And the sparkling Chenin certainly was inspired by that, because I just didn't think that you could make a 13% sparkling wine that would be like fresh and really intriguing in that way. I just always had been told that it would be too boozy, like just the alcohol would be too high. And so we wanted to try our hand in it and got access to the Massa vineyard, which is a really, really amazing site. It's out in the middle of nowhere in the like Shawa Valley. Like it's so deep in the sticks. So it's hard to get to. That part's challenging, but it was just a really, really lovely site. And so that's kind of where that one started. And then we're not working with that Chenin anymore. We did make a Chenin from Rodnik, though, last year that was also beautiful. I've just always loved Chenin. I mean, there's certain varieties that you're like, just can't help it. You have to see what it tastes like as a sparkling wine.
And you work with some Chardonnay from Massa?
We did. Yeah, the Massa Chardonnay has been in our Sunflower Sutra blend since day one. The profile, we often were picking it a tiny bit riper, so it leaned a little bit more tropical. So we usually used that one to kind of flesh out the mid palate. That was often the sort of more generous Chardonnay. And then we were working with a few other sites that brought a more mineral kind of lean side of Chardonnay to the blend. But we never did it fully. Well, actually, no, I lied. That's not true. We do have the Solera. We have a third Solera. So we can't, again, why not? And that one started with Massa Chardonnay. And so that one was basically, it's one of our blending tools for our entry-level wine. It's called Tilted Mile. And that Solera is not pure, though. That now has Alder Springs Chardonnay. It has all sorts of stuff in it. It's basically like we keep putting in Blanc de Blanc from the new vintage to replenish that. And so that's really fun. And it just adds loads of complexity and texture because it's been just aging for so many years at this point.
Can you tell me a little bit about the Sunflower Sutra? That's kind of like your flagship wine, maybe?
Yeah,
right?
I think it is. I mean, it's the one that we put that blend together first, and it was kind of the wine that started the whole project. The name is a nod to this like Allen Ginsberg poem that was written down the road from here. So that was kind of the inspiration for it, was that basically the poem's about like he and Ginsberg and Kerouac are like sitting on a hill, like, you know, raging against industrialization and talking about the perseverance of the human spirit in spite of all the industrial blight and everything around them. The kind of typical beat rant that's lovely, that we all love. But it seemed like a good metaphor for what we were trying to do, was like making elegant, like ethereal sparkling wine. That's the goal in this like kind of grimy warehouse in West Berkeley in the industrial district. And so that was why we chose that name. It just seemed like a fitting metaphor for the whole project. And really we wanted it to speak to the entire state, because again, I've always loved the idea of things being very singular and about a small plot of land, and also a little bit more about our hand in the cellar and the craft of sparkling winemaking that speaks to the entire state.
Okay.
And so that's what that wine's really about, is bringing in fruit from Mendocino, Napa, Sonoma, El Dorado, Santa Lucia Highlands, like San Benito County, Chalon, just like all over the state as far as we can drive, and then pulling together a blend that we think kind of reflects the whole thing. And we took it one step further one year and made a wine called Spirit of the Beehive that was from California, Oregon, and Washington. So I drove up to where I used to work.
Right. Okay.
And then we brought it back down and co-fermented Pinot and Chard, and then some Chardonnay from our friends who make wine in Cascade Locks called Landmass. And then we fermented that all together. That turned out to be like, the carbon footprint is way too high. You can't drive up and down the coast. That's ridiculous. And just logistically a nightmare. It just stars aligned that year that we did it in 2019, but I don't think I would love to do it again, but can't drive all the way to Washington in the middle of harvest usually.
Yeah, it's like a once in a decade kind of thing, probably.
Just to be like, let's try that once. And we're like, that was cool. Like that one's fun. But yeah, sunflower we do every year. So and we always hold back as much as we can afford to, which started out as like 10 cases. And we've been increasing that to like 20 or 30 even for some years with the sunflower, that we're extending the aging of it. Mm-hmm. So because we really want to be able to look back in 10 to 15 years and be like, let's taste through all of these wines that was really our take on what was happening for the entire state for this vintage, for all the sites we were working with. And that's kind of the idea for that wine. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're working with the base wines all the same, all native ferments and everything, but it just shows kind of your maybe artistic or blending side a little bit more on that wine.
And it allows us to kind of pull things together. We always have something that's just our acid, to be blunt. Like there's usually one or two things where we make sure that we do not overshoot it with Chardonnay, that it comes in at like 10% alcohol, that it's just a razor blade. That's not underripe though, so that we'll be able to use that if we need to, if the other sites, if we miss something or if it doesn't quite come in how we want it. And then, it also really helps just because of the more lower intervention side of how we do things, because there's just quite a bit of variation, lot to lot. Mm-hmm. And there's always surprises. So it's just nice to be able to have a lot to work with. And, we're not afraid of, like, we like to do what we need to do to the wine. Like we've never identified as natural. Like we prefer like lower intervention. We just don't want to use tons of sulfur. But yeah, that's really the point of that wine, is just showcase the whole state. Yeah.
Okay. And how does the Tilted Mile kind of fit in with that?
It's kind of if the sunflower is like the flagship, Sunset Debris is like the sort of sister wine that's meant to just be the Brut Rosé version of that wine. And then Tilted Mile is the entry level, which the name is just a reference to this Donald Davies poem. And the idea is just that we wanted there to be a more affordable wine that was like you could pour by the glass, that also spoke again to like all these sites that we were driving out to in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
That are like situated after like, mile upon mile of tilted roads. That's just the whole deal. And so the name was come up with by my sister-in-law.
Okay.
And but it's a really cool poem. And so that was kind of the deal. Yeah.
Nice. So you do work with some more single vineyard wines also, like Manchester Ridge. You've made that for a few years, I think, right?
Yeah, we did it for like 3 years or something like that. And we stopped working with them. The ownership kept changing.
Okay.
And it was also really hard to get to. So that's kind of sort of been replaced now by a couple other vineyards. We're still working with Alder Springs for Chardonnay and a few things, and Trout Gulch. Except something to do is like a higher end Blanc de Blanc.
Okay.
And it probably won't be every year, but whenever we can get access, it's really limited supply, obviously. And there's people who've been working with it a lot longer, but they've been generous enough to let us try our hand with it, which we're endlessly grateful for.
Yeah. So was 2023, was that your first Trout Gulch?
22 was.
22?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And that one's not out yet. It's coming out in November, but it's a really fun one. The acid was a little bit lower than I would have hoped. That year was like, it was just kind of one of those years like where we're always dealing with heat waves, but it turned out really, really lovely. It'll be fun to actually get it out in the world. There's not very much of it. It's probably just going to go to the wine club, but it's a really fun one. But it's hard. It's really hard to nail it when you're just working with one thing, from like one site, like I said before, year to year. So sometimes it's nice to do it as one-offs and just see which things are working and keep switching it up. Got to keep ourselves entertained.
Do you think it helps where you kind of have that sort of have a geographic diversity? Is that, I guess it gives you more tools in the blending palate probably.
Yeah,
For some of the wines.
definitely does. I mean, especially because, I mean, as you know, it's just every year there's a new problem. And now that we continue to stare down like wildfires. I mean, in the foothills, it's frost. Like every year, that's a risk. You know, you're like some of those vineyards, like Witters, they're going to lose it like one in every 4 or 5 years, basically to frost, which is kind of a brutal prospect. So you have that, and then on top of that, you have heat waves that are messing everything up. And then on top of that, there's the fires that are just always there as this threat now. So the one nice thing about that, about our production style of making so much sparkling, is that we're usually pulling everything in so early. So we're a little bit protected against the fire risk going forward, because typically when fire season's really kicking in to higher gear, we're already like halfway through, which is good. Especially since we stopped making quite as many still wines. It's more focused on sparkling. Like last year we did like 5,500 cases, which I thought was like only going to be halfway to our goal. But at this point I've realized I think that might be all we really have the capacity to make in a year.
Okay. And is that that's full production or sparkling only?
4,000 for sparkling and about 1,500 for still. It's so hard to overstate how insane the labor is, because we still do everything by hand. I thought we'd have something automated by now, and we really don't. It's basically you touch the bottle at least like 4 times. So if you think about it, it's at least twice as much labor, if not more, for sparkling. Yeah. Because you have to actually make, you make the primary fermentation, then you're just doing all the normal racking, and then you eventually get it into bottle, and then you have to riddle it, and then you have to disgorge it and label it. Each of those steps is by hand. That's a separate day, basically. Yeah. So it's almost like we're making 20,000 cases. That's how it feels anyway. Right. So we've tried to keep it sustainable and keep it fun. We have a great crew, and it's been a fun journey for sure, but it's definitely a labor of love. It's like, it's a young man's game. I don't know how long we'll be able to do it, because it's like, you start to feel it in your wrists and everything. The tendonitis will eventually set in. Yeah. So you're hand riddling most everything also, or? We do hand riddle it, but that's maybe a generous term. It makes it sound like we're like really cool with riddling racks and stuff. We don't have riddling racks, but we've adjusted our production in a way that we can basically we have to still hand riddle them, but then palletize them and essentially kick riddle them is what we call it. So that then everything's on a pallet, like you can see over here, kind of wrapped up on point, and then we agitate the entire pallet, because we tried doing it by hand for like a second. We were like, there's no way this is going to work. Yeah. And so that's why we use riddling agents for that reason. Okay. Initially we tried not doing it, and that was a nightmare. Because everything would just stick, like the bottles, the yeast would stick on the shoulder. It would take like 5 times as long to actually get it to riddle. Okay. And so it's a pretty important part of the process. And then it's also just kind of it's not the most space efficient way to store them. It'd be a lot better in cages. But we had a plan where we were going to try to invest in cages and gyro pallets, but that was during peak inflation, post pandemic, and so we kind of backed off from that. We were like, we'll just keep doing it our sort of old school way. We're very scrappy. We're like, we'll just keep cardboard's fine for now. Yeah. And the production's not that big that we can make it happen. Yeah. Okay. And everything's hand disgorged everything's hand disgorged also. Okay. We just have the little disgorging key, and every bottle gets opened with those. It's basically like shooting a shotgun every time. Yeah. We've dialed in the funniest part is with sparkling, it's so humbling, because if you mess up, you have to pay for it for like an entire lot or two, where you're like, oop, the pressure was too high. And then, there's either more loss or it's just higher impact on your hands, because it truly feels like you're shooting a shotgun. With the high pressure ones, it kind of hurts. Like the recoil is intense. Yeah. And over 100 cases. Yeah. Do that for 4,000 cases like in a year. You're like, you're going to hurt a little bit. So we treat it as a marathon, not a sprint now. As much as we can. We try to just slowly chip away at it. It's better for morale and for our general well-being. Yeah. Yeah. How do you handle dosage for the wines? Yeah, we've found that, we always do dosage trials. Sometimes it makes sense to do just 1 or 2 grams. Often we land at an extra brut. Like I found for some reason the style that we're going for, 4 grams per liter ends up just being this sweet spot where you get a little bit of Maillard, you get this caramelization that kind of starts to creep in, like a year or 2 into having dosed the wine. If you want that, is really great. If it's a richer style, like some of the sparkling reds that we do, we don't usually dose those with anything. It's just Brut Nature, because there's already so much roundness going on and texture from all the tannin, and so it really depends on the wine. But we have found that unless you're aging it for a really long time and it's super acidic, where you'd go Brut Natur. Like we don't really do that ever though. We tend to land more on the extra Brut side of things. I think the general public would probably prefer that we go closer to like Brut or like a higher end on Brut. Like people always like those wines more, like, oh, it's so complex and round, and you're like, well, there's more sugar in it. Like that's, but for my palate, I tend to veer a little bit more toward extra Brut.
Okay. And you make a pretty amazing range of SKUs for sparkling producer.
Arguably
a small one.
Far too many. Yeah. I think that some of that comes from vintage variation, and when there's problems, or not problems, but just like things change and we're like, oh, we could do this as a sparkling wine, or let's just try it or whatever. And then we're kind of trying to rein that in a little bit now, because we did so much experimenting that we've realized that, it's good to focus a little bit more on Pinot and Chard, because it's just nice to know that everything can be blended in the cellar. It just fits together a little bit better. But then if you have a bunch of Pinot and Chard and Gamay, and then you're like, where does this Freza go? Or like, where does this Sagrantino, or like this random thing that you have no idea. And you're like, do we put it in our sparkling red blend? And you're like, maybe. And then you're just doing all these trials. It creates kind of a funny situation in the winter period when we start blending. And you're like, where's this going to go? So it's been fun having a lot of SKUs, but it's definitely going to be fewer. We're going to be reining it in closer to like 6 to 10 instead of what we have been doing, which is like 20.
Okay.
Yeah. A lot of them are small, to be fair. So it's not like we're sitting on hundreds of cases of some obscure variety.
How's Meunier fit into your production?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Some of our friends have been really have had really strong opinions about Meunier, saying that it really has no place, and it's only there to hedge against Pinot not getting ripe. And Champagne was like historic, or some people say that. Of course, there's plenty of examples like Prevost and other people making great Meunier, but in California, our experience has been that it's a little bit harder to work with, because it does tend to go toward this broader kind of rich profile, which can be really great with blending. So up to this point, we had been working with Dahmen and Sonoma and/or Yount Mill in Napa for Pinot Meunier.
Okay. Yeah.
And the Napa Yount Mill Pinot Meunier is really lovely. Definitely adds quite a bit of texture and breadth to the Sunflower blend, or has up to this point. And we've only done 2 bottlings of it as a Blanc de Noir, which we haven't released yet.
Okay.
And I'm really curious. I probably should check in on it. It's been a while, but I love it. The short answer is I still really like Pinot Meunier, but especially as a blending component with what we're doing. Because if we're going for the lean, super racy style of Chardonnay, the Meunier kind of helps round it out. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, so you like it to be able to add some texture and just some, like you said, breadth to it.
Yeah,
kind of
definitely
widen it out a bit if needed.
For sure. And we always, we're always doing experiments with each thing, even if we're bringing it in for it to be serious. So one of the other ways that we bring even more texture is if it's a red grape like that, we'll pick it for sparkling, and we typically do some of it carbonically, and then we'll do some with a little bit of skin contact, and then some of it as a Blanc de Noir. So we typically try to do each lot 3 different ways at least once.
Okay.
And then we see how it performs. And oftentimes it's pretty clear where you're like, we shouldn't do it this way with this one. This doesn't really work. Or there's certain characteristics with certain vineyards where it just kind of maybe comes across as a little dull. So we just do our best to set the wine up for success, if you will. But yeah, it's a great thing.
What's your approach to still wines?
Well, with this still wines, it's kind of, we still have a similar approach. Like we'll often actually treat the still wine, say if it's a white wine, we'll pretty much treat it like a sparkling wine. We'll do really, serious cuts in the press fractions. So we'll still basically treat it like the cuvee cycle as if it were a Vin Clair.
Okay, yeah.
Just because we're just curious. We don't have the space to go too crazy on that front. I know certain wineries will make like 5 different cuts, and that's way too much. We just do 2. And then that helps give us an idea of like the most elegant expression of the vineyard. And then what happens once you've pressed a little bit harder, the pH spikes a little bit. And then you, again, that's just for blending. But otherwise, it's pretty much the same approach. We don't make as many red wines anymore just because our season is so long as it is, that August to October, to the end of October, is like 3 months straight of harvesting, can be kind of brutal. And as the years have worn on, we've kind of tried to simplify that a little bit.
Okay.
But the approach is pretty much the same, to be honest.
Yeah. Okay.
If they're more angular, we'll leave them in barrel a little bit longer, like anyone, just to kind of help build texture around that acidic profile.
Sure.
Like anybody. Yeah.
What did you find the most challenging part of starting a sparkling wine production facility, winery based on sparkling wine?
I think that it's probably just cost. I mean, because I've worked in wineries for so long, there's always been a front of house component. When we started, I really wanted there to be a focus on DTC, which is helping us out quite a bit now, given where the market's at for wholesale. Things have dipped so much, but our focus has always been on DTC. And the hardest part about that was that it's really expensive to be in West Berkeley, like the East Bay. It's really competitive. We knew that if we could do it here, we could do it anywhere, though. It's like kind of be in the belly of the beast with it. And it was challenging, though, to find a space. So when that popped up, we were like, oh man, we kind of got to go for it. But we also knew we had to sell the wines incredibly quickly to get the money back, because we weren't bankrolled. It was like we took on debt, made it happen, had enough to make the first vintage, and had to sell it instantly. So we basically, as soon as the wines finished fermenting, we started disgorging them and selling them by the glass.
Okay.
It was insane. Yeah. In retrospect, we shouldn't have done that. We should have taken our time. But like you only have the options that are in front of you. And so we had to make the best of it. But that was incredibly challenging because we were trying to refine the process, but also convince people that it was a good thing.
Yeah.
And in some cases, just convince people that sparkling wine is cool. Because a lot of people are like, I don't like sparkling wine, it's sweet. Or they just say these crazy things.
Sure.
And you're like, that's not true. And so you're trying to educate people, trying to make sparkling wine on an accelerated timeline in a place that's pretty expensive, but there's not a whole lot of room for error. So you can't really mess up. You need to keep executing. And then at the same time, create branding that's intriguing enough that it'll like actually catch people's eye, like out in retail stores and in restaurants. And build those relationships in addition to the DTC thing. Because that was different for me. I was always a more DTC oriented person in the industry. I was always about hand sales and wanted to actually tell the story. So that part came kind of naturally, but it was hard to do it on such an accelerated timeline.
Right, for the sparkling wine. Yeah, I mean, you guys have a pretty bustling and busy tasting room, I feel like, on weekends.
Yeah, it's great getting people out, especially with the First Fridays thing has kind of gotten out of hand. That's like insane, where like that event has hit critical mass, which we're really proud of because we put a ton of work into that to build it with our buddies, just like getting our chef friends to come out, and it really gives all of them an opportunity to kind of pay for their rent for the month in one event, like it does for us, which is really cool. It's always, I mean, I think that's an important thing for me, I suppose, in that whole conversation about what's been challenging is like, I've always been more oriented towards like community and towards like helping each other out and wanting everything to take a kind of idealistic approach to capitalism and not have it just be about cutting each other down. I've never really seen it as a zero-sum game. I've wanted it to, like, it's important for us to be making the wine with people who are cool, consuming it with people who are cool, and with really good food, with chefs who are producing food that we're just as excited about as the wine. To me, it's always been about that total picture. And so like maintaining that balance while also running a successful business is incredibly difficult, obviously. Because the market, all the incentives come from this place of like being more combative and competitive about it. But we really want to keep it copacetic and like fun and lift up as many people as possible. We just love food. So it's just been a natural thing to partner with all of these incredibly talented Bay Area chefs.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. I mean, there's always, like you said, there's great food. And then you guys have a really great community here in this little one block radius with the other producers.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, beyond just being able to throw events with all of them and the people who like I learned so much from, like at Brock and Donkey and Goat and then Vinca Minor before, and now Tessier being on the block. It's super cool, especially, I mean, during harvest things, everything breaks. And so being able to walk 15 feet away and be like, dude, I need your scale or your forklift. I have 10 tons of Pinot and I have to dump it into the press. And then they just get it. They're like, oh yeah, of course. And like, there's been certain harvests where we've had to lean on each other in like ridiculous ways, but everybody gets it.
Yeah.
Where you're like, oh yeah, no, of course you can take this hose because yours just burst or whatever it is. Like, so we're really fortunate in that way. It's, it's a special thing. And being in the city is also just amazing because we're like a block away from air gas. So when you need to get argon or more dry ice, you just literally walk across the street to get it. And that kind of stuff's amazing. So there definitely are perks for being in an industrial area.
Yeah, I mean, you're 2 blocks off the freeway.
Yeah.
Also, and
they're mixed. They're like mixing concrete across the street. There's just like rocks being dumped all over. Some of those things are challenges too, but it's also really cool. I mean, you can't overstate how amazing it is to be able to like just drive 20 minutes to be in San Francisco to drop off wine and come back. You can do that on your lunch break, which is ridiculous. So like being able to have our finger on the pulse of what's going on with all of our favorite chefs and restaurants has been just such a fun aspect of being in the city. So we work pretty closely with Flower and Water. We make this like Lambrusco style wine for them. And they'll be like, oh, I need like 5 cases. And I just literally like, yep, I'll be there in 20 minutes. It's like, it's crazy that we can do that, because a lot of the people in wine country, they have to just plan these whole week long trips or whatever it is to work the market. We're just kind of casually popping in to be like, hey, what's going on?
Yeah.
So that's really fun.
You threw your own festival this year, Thirst Trap Festival, just recently.
Yep, inaugural Thirst Trap. Yeah, it was super fun. We've always wanted to just throw a little party, just kind of highlighting all of the producers who focus on traditional method sparkling wine, because there's not that many of us. And this year we just kind of limited it to most of just our closer friends who were doing it. There's a few more people we'd like to get involved next year. But it went really well. And it's just, I mean, I think it's especially weird if you think about the context of like when we were starting, the number of conversations we had to have with retailers who were basically like, they're like, wait, why are you making traditional method sparkling? Like, make pet nats. And we were like, I don't really want to. Like, I'd rather do this. And so it's just kind of fun to finally be able to embrace it, like as a festival, you know, where everybody like trying to show the public, all of our friends and all these people who've been honing this craft for so long, because it really is kind of like a monkish existence with winemaking in general, but sparkling wine, there's something about it that really just makes you feel like you're the old Frenchman in a cave, just like toiling away, like opening bottles in like darkness and like everything's damp. And so it's just cool to be able to get together in full sunlight and open the bottles and hopefully make some people happy. So it was really cool.
Yeah, nice sunny Berkeley July day. It's like
we got lucky.
Berkeley weather.
I know, you never know around here. It's always like a little gloomy, and then all of us just get spoiled because we have to exist within that 65 to 70 degree window. Otherwise, we're like, it's too hot, too cold.
Yeah.
But no, we were lucky to get a sunny day. It was super fun.
Has that conversation changed from your perspective with, I guess, maybe that little pushback with pet nat versus the traditional method since you've been going?
It's a good question. I'm not even really sure I know the answer. All I know is that I just always wanted to make wines that were a little bit more precise and less like throw it to the wind that some pet nats kind of seem to be. I do think in general that people are a little bit more open now. Because we used to have people walk into the tasting room and they'd be like, wait, are these wines natural? And we'd be like, no. Or like, well, we're using commercial yeast for this part of it because we want it to be controlled. And that would turn some people off. I think that at this point, that Thirst Trap Festival actually kind of was interesting in that way, where I realized that there were so many people who've been supporting all of our friends and us without us really realizing. They were like in all of our wine clubs and stuff like that. So I do think there's been a core audience that remains the same, you know what I mean? But then at the same time, I think we've won a lot of people over. I think the general like millennial thirst for bubbles has continued to endure, you know? Like people just like things that have bubbles. So on some level that helps us out. But I'm not sure if people really care about the nuance. Like there's certain things that kind of crack me up when we're like, you know, we'll spend years tinkering and trying to make the most ethereal, like perfect little beautiful expression of like this one thing. People try it and be like, yeah, that's fine. And then they try one of our like really like fun and over the top sparkling reds and they're like, this is the best wine you've ever made. And you're like, yeah. And we're like, it's cool. Like, and there's a time and place for all these things, but I'm not sure that anyone's ever going to really care about traditional method sparkling as much as we do, but that's okay. I think in general, we're winning people over and hopefully it continues to trend in that direction. We'll just continue to surround ourselves with, you know, good people in the meantime and keep creating events to give people the experience of the wine with food that we think really helps the wine shine. I think that's a key part of it too. That's why we just always do so much food programming. That, and because these days, you know, the old school wine tasting experience has kind of changed. Like people want an experience. They want like an event. They don't want to just come out and have a stuffy, like 3-pour experience with like rocks being set out on the table. Like that era I think is over. So hopefully, I hope people are coming around more, but also some people who are doing it in the more like 0-0 way, like more power to them. Like if people can do that and do it well, I'm like, that's like Jedi level winemaking that I'm blown away by. Whenever I taste some of the wines, I'm like, that's so cool. But I wish that some of them were a little bit more consistent because it can be a little hit or miss. But yeah, I don't know. I think people are coming around to traditional method even more and more. Yeah. At least I hope so.
What do you have planned for this upcoming harvest? Well, I
We've-
think you had said earlier, like 3 weeks or so out for you.
A few weeks out. And the main thing that's different this year is we're taking a little bit of a step back, like everybody, just to kind of refocus as we, kind of create our 5-year plan, because we've been doing this for a while and it's easy to lose perspective when you've got your head down, just trucking along, because it's just so much work. So for this year, what we're going to be doing to take a little bit of a step back is doubling down on all the sites that we really love. And it's a little bit more of a focus on Pinot, Chard, and Gamay. So we're doing Gamay from 3 vineyards, and then Chard and Pinot from all the classic vineyards we've worked with. And then we'll see during harvest, we'll probably get convinced to like take on a few tons of something new, like inevitably, but we've been good so far. We haven't taken anything on. The only thing new is we're going to be working with Pickpool from the Mansfield's Barsodi vineyard. So we're going to be doing sparkling Pickpool, which should be fun.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
Seems like one you shouldn't have a problem with the acid, I guess, maybe.
Nope, definitely not. Yeah. No, it should be great. It's always fun to try new things, and just if it doesn't feel like it's perfect as a single vineyard, single vintage bottling, it'll be easy enough to like blend it in with something else and give that lots more acid. So, but I'm excited to try it out. I think it's a really lovely wine, and I got to work with it when I worked at Donkey and Goat, so I'm already familiar with it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, they grow some great fruit up there.
Oh, it's one of the best places to visit. We're going in a couple weeks, because then you just get to like gorge yourself on peaches and stone fruit the whole time you're there too.
Yeah, the really good stone fruit too.
It's so good.
The perfect,
Goldbud's amazing.
Perfect stone fruit.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And Witters is just one of our favorite. I love that vineyard too. So it's always fun to go visit that and check out the Gamay.
Nice.
Yeah, so it should be good. Nothing too crazy though. We're looking to take a little bit of a breather. The harvest, since really, 2020 was certainly the most challenging, no question, with all the fires and everything. But the last few have just, it takes a toll on you when you have a small team. So we're like, let's like rest a little bit and like think through the next steps for the brand and tighten it up a little bit, and hopefully just continue to, we're lucky we have an amazing label artist. Maddie has been so fantastic to work with. So it feels like we've kind of built out the brand universe, and now we just need to continue to refine it and make the quality as good as possible. Mm-hmm. That's probably the biggest problem is I want us to just spare no expense, focus on quality, and just, that's the whole point. So maybe someday we'll downsize so we just don't have to rely on it financially.
Okay.
And just have a tiny little hole in the wall where we can make 100 cases a year. But we'll see. For now, we'll keep doing it the way we've been.
Yeah. What's the best place for people to get your wines, try your wines? I know you have a wine club also.
Yeah, the wine club is certainly the best way to do it and actually get like the best value. As we move forward, it's going to be moving probably more and more in the direction of mailing list.
Okay.
For the way that some of the wines will be actually available. Revel is our distributor in California. They do a great job of getting them around. With more of a focus on restaurants, so you can go to places like Murad, Flower and Water, you can go to or Fool's Errand if you want more of a wine bar experience in San Francisco. There's all sorts of places you can find them in the stores, but the tasting room is open Friday through Sundays, and that's always the best. Not coming on First Friday, probably, if you want to actually taste the wines and hang out in a more leisurely way, would be the move. So yeah. Nice.
Anything you'd like to touch on or think we missed, or that you'd
I don't know. I think we covered most of it. I think just hopefully we can continue to get people excited about bubbles and come on out, and people are always welcome to come and actually disgorge some bottles themselves if they want to come see what the process is like. I think that's probably the number one thing that you just can't overstate enough with this style of winemaking. Is initially when we started, I feel like I thought there was going to be a lot more competition and brands popping up making sparkling wine. And I think the reason that there haven't been is that it's just truly so difficult to do consistently, and the workload is so high. So it's fun to convey that to people so you can just see how many hands really touch the bottles, like how much of a handmade product it truly is.
Yeah.
So if anyone wants to come out and disgorge bottles, we always need help. Okay. So.
Thanks for listening today. The Hammerling wines are really unique with some great textures to go along with the high acids. They also make some still wines from great sources you should check out. You can find them at hammerlingwines.co or follow them at Hammerling Wines on Instagram. You can follow the podcast on wherever you're listening, and the Instagram at Indie Wine Podcast. And feel free to email indiewinepodcast@gmail.com with comments, questions, or feedback. If you could tell your wine friends about the podcast too and help spread the word, I'd really appreciate it. Rating or subscribing helps too. There's also a Patreon if you choose to support the podcast monetarily to allow for more episodes and to help defray other costs like travel and research book purchases and try to keep the podcast ad-free. Any amount is appreciated. I have a small token of my appreciation to send to you also if you do. Link is in the show notes. We'll be back soon with another episode. Have a good one.